Hey everybody, welcome to today's roundtable discussion. My name is Tricia Sheehan. I'm a certified holistic health coach with Wellness Warriors. I also run a Facebook event called Healthy and Ready for Anything and the Facebook page Science Unsettled. And we are doing a series of roundtable discussions. And today I'm really excited for our panelists. They have so much interesting tips and perspectives to share with you, and I know you'll get a lot out of it. And our goal with these discussions is to broaden all of our perspectives on what's going on with the pandemic and, zoom out a little bit and look at it from a bit of a bigger picture instead of getting into the tiny little details and fighting back and forth about them. We're going to back up a little bit and talk about the idea of using science to understand what's going on in the world around us, the benefits of that, the limitations of that, also the concept of scientism, which is an excessive belief in the ability of science alone to understand the world around us. And we're going to talk about research. All of these ladies are here because they do it really well. And I was hoping they could share their tips, resources, ideas to help you feel inspired and prepared to do your own research, because that's always super important. So to get us started, I just want to mention this is one in a series of roundtable discussions. So you can find everything in two places. You can either go to Science Unsettled on Facebook, or you can go to my YouTube channel, which is Tricia Sheehan, Tricia Sheehan, and you can find everything there. So we're going to get started with some introductions. So if each of you could just take a minute or so and let everybody know who you are and what your background is, we'll just dive into it that way. So how about Jasmine, you want to go first?
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel. My name is Jasmine Jafferali, and I am a holistic health coach. I hold a master's in public health and healthcare administration with an emphasis on maternal and infant health education and nutrition.
Thank you. Michele?
Hi, I'm Michele Castle. I'm also a holistic health coach, and I have a master's degree in theological studies from Duke Divinity School. I was in ministry for 17 years. I was a high school teacher, did youth ministry, young adult ministry, and I'm a mother of 3.
Great, thank you. Meghan?
Hi, my name is Meghan Pizzica. I am a parent of a child with autism, as well as a parent of a neurotypical child. And I was a drug rep for Pfizer in a former life. So
great, thank you. Hey, Emily, how about you?
Hey, I'm Emily Saunders. I am a mom of 4 boys, 2 biological and 2 foster that we're close to adopting. And I love to make products for families that are toxic free and high quality vitamins. My husband is an integrative medicine physician, MD, and we work together to try to provide those things to families.
Awesome, thank you. So as you guys heard, everyone here, including myself, is a parent. And, we definitely hope to inspire any, grandparents, parents, childcare workers, anyone who's involved with keeping kids healthy. We want you to feel inspired and empowered that you can take a very, active, engaged role in children's health, and you don't have to be a doctor or trained researcher or scientist, and that you can really and truly impact the life and the health of a child in your life yourself. And we'll learn more about that from the panel today. So to kick us off, basically during the pandemic, there's been a very renewed interest in science and health from the public, which has been a silver lining of it all. And you all have been researching health topics for much longer than just the pandemic, for many years more than that. How did you get involved with that level of engagement in the research and science and trying to look at things for yourself and think through them? How did that even begin?
Well, I'll start, I guess. I think when I was a grad student working on my master's in public health, at that time in 2002, 2003, we were being taught to question everything that we studied and researched, that not to take everything at face value, and that there was always another side. I heard a really well-renowned doctor, and who's both doctor and attorney, that said, if we're not questioning the science, we're not questioning things, and we've already lost the battle with moving science and medicine forward. So, for us to not question things is really demeaning to science and moving it forward.
That's really interesting concept. How come you think that more people don't take that view on it? That it's so critical to really question things?
Go ahead.
I had this idea about like kind of like this idea of like if you're buying a car from CarMax or something, okay, not a paid plug, but anyway, you know, their brand is the idea that, you know, they've done the research. So you'll pay a little bit more because, you know, they've got their backing to it, right? Versus like buyer beware. You're buying it from some Joe Schmo on the corner that meets you in a parking lot. You know, you're going to want to probably, you know, bring somebody that knows what they're doing, like maybe take it to the mechanic or something like that. And I think that's one of the fundamental things that's affecting all of our situation right now. And I know this has been the case for many years because Americans are kind of like fat and happy, literally, you know, of course they're taking their antidepressants to make it so, but you know, the idea that, you know, they can trust, you know, that our government is good, that intrinsically pharmaceutical companies, you know, make money from helping people. And so they or the pediatricians are very well trained. They're the experts. So there's sort of like basic thing, you know, of buyer beware, you know, versus like, this is CarMax, so everything's okay. And I think if we could just get people, and I've seen it over the past, you know, 10 years, where something will happen, right? And it seems like that's what you're asking, like, what happens to make somebody go, wait a minute, you know? And for me, it was, I got involved with a nutrition company and we started talking about detoxing, you know, and I wanted to drop weight. I mean, I'm from Miami, like who doesn't want to drop weight, you know? So yeah, I was like, oh, you know, blah, 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 you know, 2 pant sizes, whatever, that sounds great, you know? And then she said, oh, well, you know, it's because when you detox, you know, then it releases inches and pounds quickly and safely. And I was like, well, I don't really care about the detoxing, but the releasing inches and pounds quickly and safely. But then I went on to learn that like, this was 16 years ago, that they were spraying toxins on the food and there was toxins in the water. And I was like, what? That's crazy. You know, what about the FDA and stuff? What do you mean? You know, we have the best tap water in the world. You're not going to get Montezuma's revenge in America, you know, and stuff like that. But I kept on seeing people's health radically transform from detoxing in a way that nobody really understood, you know? And that was my like, wait a second, what's going on? And I didn't gain the weight back. And it was just all these things. And then as doctors I started working with different patients and their doctors had told them like, there's nothing I can do. We've tripled your metformin, blah, 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 whatever, you know, just, you know, basically get your affairs in order or whatever, you know? Mm. And then I would help them. And then they would just and the doctor would not call me. And that was like another level of, wait a minute, now, come on, you've got to be curious because I'm amazed. You know what I mean? We're all amazed. And so it's been like, I think it's a journey, but you have these experiences where you're like, realize it's buyer beware, like the people that you know, thought were like experts or had your best interest in mind, you know, at best, don't know that much, you know?
Yeah,
Michele,
so it seems,
I think that,
go ahead, Meg.
do you mind if I add on a thought there with Michele? I think Michele brings up a really great point. And we all have psychological defenses that we use, and they're accepted in the world of medicine, psychiatry, and psychology. And one of those defenses is abnegation, and it's also known as denial. It's 100% legitimate. We all use it actually, unknowingly. And denial is from a like a medical terminology perspective is really a psychological defense when a person is faced with a fact that is too uncomfortable to accept, and they therefore completely reject it, won't even look at it or consider it as a possibility. And it has helped people survive, I think, for millennial, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. If you deny this story, then you can just forge ahead with your story and therefore be successful in your own story. However, when it comes to science and really understanding how chemicals impact individuals, it doesn't help. It stops conversations completely.
Yeah.
For
that's so
me,
great.
when my husband was in medical school, he, like I said, was a traditionally trained MD and kind of went about his own training to become more integratively minded over with some physicians that were practicing the way that he does now. And it was really that everything that he had learned was in question. And he's always had a very scientific family that did ask those questions, engineering, scientific, back when he was, younger in the way that he grew up. And so but when he would ask these questions, it was kind of like he was sort of shunned in a way to be like, you're not like, obviously, like, we're teaching you this thing so that you'll accept it and you're going to do it, right? Like, that's what you're supposed to do. And when he was not willing to just do that. And so instead he surrounded himself by people that were asking the questions and really looking at the research and the flaws in the research and what was wrong with it, and other studies that were funded in a more appropriate way and that kind of thing. And for me, who I'm not scientific, it just was kind of mind-blowing that, like, oh, well, we've always been taught that this is what we're supposed to trust. And I think that's what's happening now, is all of these voices that are experts and that are, appropriately viewing research are getting quieted through, losing medical licenses and getting fired and these kinds of things to negate their research and that kind of thing. And then you've got to look really hard for it rather than just reading the news headlines. And so most people, they're like, well, the whole trust the science thing, they're only seeing this one narrative, and we've got to dig deeper in order to question that. But that was really my introduction, was when he was kind of going through this mind-blowing, like, wow, all this stuff that they've taught me is like, nobody really wants to back up the question. When I ask the questions, there's nothing to fully back it up.
Wow. That's pretty fascinating. And it's interesting that, your husband, Dr. Wiggy, his and his partner's practice in Winston-Salem, North Carolina is blowing up. It's just, so many people want in, they can't even get in to see him usually. So there does seem to be this shift in understanding that the conventional approach is not the only approach, and that there's more tools in the toolbox, and their office has some really cool ones. But, when we're all talking to folks and trying to share information and help people become more educated, that there's not only one way, like, what tools or approaches do you all use to get past, like what Meghan was saying, that there's some sort of strong built-in mechanisms, like, I don't want to see that, like, I'm fat and happy over here and everything's going fine, and I don't want to look at what you're saying. And we are all part of the movement of, this is too important to be ignorant about the other side, and we have got to raise awareness, we've got to look at it, and we're sort of all warriors in this together. So maybe you guys can speak to that. Like, what do you do to help gain this other perspective?
I think the number one thing for me, because like I said, I was in ministry and stuff like that, and then been coaching people for a long time. But I like to be liked. I like to be that person that, and I've done so many, and that's a lot. I have close to 5,000 friends on Facebook, which, relatively speaking, it's not that many, but I actually know most of those people. Like, I've had so many relationships in these very public jobs where I get to know people, or they get to know me on conference calls and things like that. So for me to decide to start saying some of these more controversial things, it was a real, like, spiritual thing for me about, like, courage and, what am I committed to? Who am I? Like, I'm not my results, but what, however things go, like, I got to look myself in the eye. And I know this is kind of a little bit few steps back from what your question is, but I think as we're deciding or being out in the world, like, making sure that we're protecting ourselves and that we're doing things in a way where we don't have decision fatigue. We don't always have to sit there and go, oh my gosh, should I say something? What should I say? Blah, 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 or, and how much am I going to take from people? And am I going to address that or not? Like, so I kind of developed like a little system for myself, because we get to be in joy and peace, where we're not going to be, it's like, we have to take care of ourselves. It's kind of like social media, or, work, self-care. You know, we got to protect our energy. So for me, I'm actually not interested in fighting with people at all. Like I am interested in sharing information for people to think about. I don't have to be the expert. I don't say like, oh, this is the truth. I am like, hey, look at this. Humor is amazing. And I will engage with people. A lot of people listen to me because I've helped them raise $20,000 or done something amazing for them, or picked them up on the side of the road when they got a flat tire. So they know I'm not like some evil, whatever, Nazi or something, you know. But and I think that's a gift, you know, because we can reach people like that wouldn't normally hear stuff. But I think the big thing is to you know, get people to just have the confidence to listen to what they kind of know. A lot of people kind of know. And I think that's where I'm at. It's like, no, you know, that child saying like, hey, the emperor's naked. If you look back to, you know, the psychology, like what Tricia was saying, like, or yeah, was that Tricia? Oh, no, Meghan, sorry, Meghan was saying about, you know, the psychology of it, right? So we're being manipulated right now. Like it's a fact by, you know, big tech, by Google searches. You can't find stuff. It just disappears. People just disappear. Forget about the doctor not having a voice. Anyone that shares something that the doctor said gets their entire YouTube canceled, and Facebook groups with 500,000 people just disappearing like that. So, you know, that, you know, it's just, it's very interesting, but I think giving people something to think about, impact, you know, something that resonates with them, like a little question that's just like a tiny bit further than where they are. Just a little.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Because if you put this stuff out there, then they're just like, what the heck are you talking about? But if you're just like, huh, what's that? I don't know. What happened to that person? Right. And that's what happened to me. You just start pulling these threads. And then next thing you know, you're like, oh my Lord, this entire thing is such a money game.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
Yeah. Jasmine, how about you? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think that creating a safe platform where to just basically honor that scientists have different views, and I've said this before on my own platform, is that we as scientists need to have different views, and that's to be respected, acknowledged, and not demonized. So that when you create that space on that platform saying, hey, let's just have a healthy discussion, and scientists with different viewpoints, you know, can have essential information and perspectives that can help move us forward in the name of science. And so my approach is, hey, here's the research journals, here's the information. You need to take responsibility to read it. Now, if you're just going to read my post and get mad at me for explaining how masks work and don't work, well, then you didn't read the science and the studies and the information I presented out there to you. So if someone says something, I say, did you take the time to read the studies? Because I did. So until you did, then let's have a respectful dialogue. But the problem is that people see something that's against what the mainstream and the narrative is being told to them, that they then respond with emotion and not with intellection. So that becomes the problem out there. And social media is not a platform of well-being. Let's just be honest right now, right? It is not a platform of well-being. It is a very unhealthy place to be. And I just, even myself last night, getting very frustrated and want to get snarky and put things out there. And I had just like, turn it off, turn it off, turn it off. But, you know, the things I keep trying to reiterate out there is that science is not a belief system. You know, even as a Christian, it's not to be put on a pedestal. It's not to be idolatrized, you know? And so we need to stop treating it as such, because it's not a person. That real silent science is challenged, it's questioned, and has true measurable outcomes. And that's why there's different points of views out there. We know that medicine is not a one size fits all. Science is not a one size fits all. Not all doctors go to the same school. They are taught by different systems, by different professors. And at the end of the day, they are independent contractors in the world of medicine. And so while one may have a different viewpoint, that is okay if someone else has a different viewpoint. but we shouldn't cancel someone out because they are questioning and thinking differently than what the overall experts are saying out there. Corona's not been out there very long. It's only been a year.
Yeah, that's true.
It takes several years to become an expert in something, especially in the world of science. It takes 20 years for medicine to catch up with science. So we need to stop putting it on a pedestal. We need to start asking more thoughtful and deeper questions with respect and acknowledgement.
Yeah, that reminds me of how we used to always be told, go get a second opinion. If there's something going on with your health, that was one of the primary things they would say. And that sort of transformed into just listen to me and do what I am saying you need to do. But getting a second opinion is always a smart idea. And getting back to this concept of learning about all of your options and deciding what's best for you. It's your right to know what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we're adults, we're not children. We have brains, we can think for ourselves. And that was a big red flag for me. Like there's so much information that it's like Michelle was saying, it's very difficult to access. And you have to use a different search engine. You have to spend the time to dig deeper, and you have to figure out who on social media is really genuine and legit and smart, and who, you know, following them, and how do you get a source to back up what they're saying. And it can be very complicated and time consuming. But that's, I think one of the keys is to getting back to that with, you know, good science, like Jasmine was saying, good science requires debate. It should absolutely not be demonized because that's part of science.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so politicized now that we've gotten completely away from the original point of science.
Oh, exactly. And I'm just with in a sort of a healthy discussion with a Parks and Recreation Center. I'm like, why are we still taking temperatures? Well, we're following CDC guidelines. I'm like, well, CDC back in June of 2020 got, you know, silently actually kind of put it under the rug that taking body temperatures is not a valid way of determining if one has COVID. And so I've presented the science and information. She said she'll read it when she gets a chance. I kind of know what that means, but I'm still going to question and challenge her that you are kind of wasting your time, especially in the heat of Florida.
Yeah, right.
And, you know, and it's already 85 degrees outside. So body temperature is naturally going to rise. Or a woman's monthly cycle is going to change her temperature. So that, you know, I'm like, so you're wasting everyone's time. And it's a medical exam at the end of the day. You're doing a medical exam in front of a public space, you know, and I have to give consent to that. Right? It's my body, my choice. So I have to give consent now to taking a body temperature. And there's legalities around that as well. What if it's wrong and I don't have COVID? And, you know, so there's a whole other space of that as well. But challenging the status quo is what is difficult for a lot of people to come to terms with.
Yeah. Megan and Emily, I want to give you guys a chance to jump in.
I was just going to say, I think one of the things as far as answering your question, how do we get people to discuss and think, is just to be, number one, a critical thinker yourself, and to allow that to present in just the everyday conversations that we have. I think one-on-one is always ideal versus, I mean, you know, I think all of us have like our little communities where people come to want that information, but I'm not one to just post things on social media, but I get a lot of people ask me questions, and you know, whether that's through a Facebook message or, you know, text or whatever. Hey, I saw this thing, like, what do you think about this? What are you guys doing about that? And I think being just approachable and open to discussion in the way that we live our lives, and that in every sense of the word, across the gamut, to be approachable and reasonable, and to encourage people to think. You know, I like to tell, I like to be like Jesus. I like to ask questions back to people when they try to, you know, when I'm challenged with a question, to present a different question, or, hey, well, have you ever thought about it this way, kind of thing. And so I think that really often can open dialogue where people want to cut things off.
Yeah, that's a really powerful point. Go ahead, Megan.
And to respond in a way like, I hear what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
I acknowledge what you're saying. And are you open to hearing X, Y, Z? I think that's very well said, Emily.
And Jasmine, I think that is a really good point too, to asking if someone is open to your input at that time. Because if they're not in a place to receive it, it's not the right time to provide it regardless. You know,
Mhm.
well, if you become interested, you know, I would love to share my thoughts and do some research that where we can all kind of come together in some form of agreeing, even if it's agreeing to disagree, right? In a
Right,
positive
right,
way.
absolutely.
As a Pfizer sales rep, I know that we would always try to start where we could agree with the physician, trying to find, you know, I agree that COVID has been very difficult and deadly for many people, right? We can all agree that has been hard, and it has been, we can agree that it is a transmissible disease through the air, right? It's a respiratory disease. So start with the things that you can agree on. If you just go in and say, oh, COVID doesn't exist, it's a big farce, that doesn't work either, right? And then one of the things that my boss has always said to me was, don't call their baby ugly. So if they had a particular medicine that they were prescribing on a regular basis for a particular condition, and you said, oh, doctor, XYZ drug is the worst. It doesn't work. Their studies are junk. You shouldn't use it. And it's the one that he or she reached for first, time and time again. They are never going to listen to your pitch as to why your product might be better. And then as your discussions evolve over time, you find one area where there might be a little space to consider a new topic, like Michele said earlier, like just create that opportunity, drop a nugget or plant a seed, right, of possibility, determine if there's space there. And then when it comes to things like COVID, though, and some of the conditions like autism, when you want to talk to families or parents like that, I find that focusing on the outliers. So once we went to see, my son has additional layers to his autism, and so he had a blood condition where he had neutropenia for an extended period of time, and some blood work one time brought back some other information. And so we went to see this highly respected blood doctor. And now I forget all the terms now that I'm on camera, right? But we went to see him, and we talked a little bit about vaccines and autism. And I know that is not this conversation, and I'm not saying in this moment that vaccines cause autism. So please know that I'm not going there for any viewers, but I was able to, in a very delicate way, get this very in the box, yet highly respected and highly intelligent physician to come to a place of agreement that yes, sometimes that causes damage to young people, and we agreed that it was terrible, and then creating the possibility of saying, well, wouldn't it be great if we could identify who might be the most affected, right, before it happened, before providing the vaccine, and then not give it to that person, or just wait, just give it a little space and development, and then test them again and see if they could tolerate a little further down the road to reduce those impacts. And we were able to completely agree in that moment there, but it took acknowledging that, you know, vaccines are necessary, vaccines are important, and most people can handle them. And wouldn't it be great if planting that seed of possibility for the future, if we're able to all step back in agreement and find a new path to identify those who can't tolerate a medicine. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great point about it doesn't have to be so black and white. You know, everything now is pro or anti, fight.
Yeah.
Versus how do we look to the future and do what's best for everyone? Because that's what everybody wants. Nobody wants another person to be sick or injured. So what are the seeds of possibility? What could it look like to be different than it is today, where there's just a one size fits all approach? And maybe, you know, what about testing to see, can we identify someone who doesn't handle it as well, who needs a different approach? And how do we move towards more precise medicine, more personalized medicine? And wouldn't that be an interesting possibility that we could all discuss and debate? And getting out of that black and white thinking in those camps, that's such a powerful idea. Thank you for bringing that up. Which I think is also a good point for the listeners to remember that, you know, if you see people like us or other people trying to share information, share perspectives, it's not about fear mongering. It's not about convincing you that we are correct. We have the truth with a capital T. It's really, truly not that. And sometimes that nuance can be lost in social media. Truly, like, it's about planting the seeds of possibility. How can we make it better? How can we become more educated to improve the world for all? And it's not about being right. It's not about living in fear. And it's not about selfishness, because honestly, the most selfish thing to do would be to just shut up and do what's best for your family and not deal with any of the controversies or fights or anything. So, it's just in a very heart-centered place where we all and others are sharing and trying to make the world better. And it's about what if, and planting that seed of possibility. Absolutely.
I'm gonna say, can I say one thing about that?
Yeah.
Is like this general principle of, and this goes for just being an adult and a consumerist, and and I'm not even going to say capitalist, just being a person that's making decisions in the marketplace, is looking at people that have a conflict of interest, versus have nothing at all to gain. Like when you're looking at, how, these detective shows or something, it's like, you got to have, means and opportunity and motive, right? And if somebody has absolutely no motive whatsoever, there's nothing to gain. They're not selling you anything. They're telling you to take apple cider vinegar or whatever. They don't even sell apple cider vinegar. You can't even, nothing. There's no reason for them to be telling you this other than just opening themselves up to massive controversy. Like like you mentioned, I mean, that person has more credibility, I think, to me, as we sort through information, versus someone that like is literally paid to promote something, and like we call that, it's like tobacco science or something. And you can, we've all seen those posters and stuff where doctors are telling, pregnant women to smoke, and, thinking that mercurochrome is great, and, spraying DDT on kids, and, all of these things. And I don't like hold those people, it is what it is. I'm not like saying like, oh, they were trying to kill people, but I'm just like this pride that people have around like science, and that it's this homogenous thing, and that it's like permanent. Like once, like you asked the question, is the science settled? I'm like, it's like, that's just not how science is. We're always learning, always learning. And so somehow we need this like bigger principle, about that. And I think if we could just have that humility, it's just kind of weird how it, like the most brilliant people I've known are always really curious, about things. And if you find one thing that doesn't fit with your other stuff, you can't just, if that's a fact, you have to look at that. That might change everything. How many times have we changed everything? It was the earth was flat. We had the earth was the center of the universe. Then it turns out, oh, the sun was the center of the universe. Then it turns out, oh no, there is no center of the universe, and whatever, and that's science. So acting like we've arrived ever is just the opposite, of that open mind. And I think, I wish that people could somehow get back to that humility, and that curiosity, because the mind is open, and then taking in new information and not threatened by that, versus like, oh, there's something that doesn't fit. But when people are selling you something, I'm fine with that, but then I'm going to take that with a grain of salt.
Right.
And people aren't doing that. They're like, I mean, one resource for people to look at is Children's Health Defense. Bobby Kennedy, his, such an interesting story. He was he still is a big environmentalist, very kind of anti-industry sort of thing, very concerned about environmental toxins and stuff like that. And then just getting backed into the whole health thing, and then looking at like, wow, every single vaccine manufacturer is a convicted felon. Like, okay, I mean, sure, they're still allowed to do business and stuff. I mean, that's fine, I guess, but like, certainly don't act like they have anything they say is beyond reproach. That's just not scientific at all. It's kind of silly, as a matter of fact. They're just, so where somebody's like a character witness, right? A character witness. Like you can say, hey, I've known this person for a long time, or, oh, we can't listen to this character because they've lied under oath a million times, like that. The sources of your information matter. And I think that can help when we're trying to sort through sources,
Yeah. That sort of reminds me, on the last panel, there was someone who's a former lawyer, and she was talking about the importance of treating it sort of like you would in a court of law, where you cross-examine witnesses and you get to ask them questions, and people from both sides get to ask the questions, and for both sides are presented to try to have a possibility of getting to the truth. That's how it's handled. But in the court of public opinion, that process is very demonized.
Well, that's what the problem with censorship is, because then you can't even have like a real conversation, and you're like, well, why can't I even know that? Then it kind of creates this environment for conspiracy theories or something. And you're like, well, why are you silencing this person? I just wanted to know what they were saying. They have 16 degrees. I don't know. They're president of whatever. Why can't I hear what they have to say? And then like, I get, censored because I like took a screenshot, it's just very weird. It's very, very weird how all this stuff has gone. And I have to say, a lot of the way that it's been handled has really, given a lot less credibility to a lot of things. It's like, why do you have to silence everyone that remotely asks one question? Like, it's very suspicious behavior. Like if the police are coming to your house and you're like out back burning a bunch of stuff, like, okay, that's kind of like, you look like you're burning evidence. Like, like that's what that looks like, It just
Michele, it really goes back to your point earlier about the sun and the earth, and which was going around which. And if we think back through our defenses, right, bringing it back to denial, Galileo was under house arrest and would probably have been, killed in the gallows if he hadn't been so old and was about to die anyway. So it still existed. It still existed, this refusal to consider. It threatens who we are for some reason. It threatens us at our core. And I'm using the word "our" as a comprehensive, universal "our." And it would be great, wouldn't it, if we could figure out how to move forward and not feel so threatened at that core place.
And then of course it turned out he was wrong. He was right, then he was wrong, and it just, the bigger we, are open to, and the more we learn, the more like, it's like, hey, remember when they, everything was gravitational pull, right? And that means that the further objects are apart, the weaker the attraction. But then, all of a sudden there's like subatomic, subnuclear things, and there's quarks, and quarks are the opposite. Quarks, the further you pull them apart, the stronger they are. And it's just like, that's impossible. Well, it's impossible except for it's there. So, it's
right. And everything is cyclical, right? And history is going to repeat itself. So I think there's going to be, we look at what happened with the 76 swine flu and the mass vaccination that happened then, and then all the injuries that came up, and then they had to pull it. Well, now we're in a phase where we're seeing 10 countries that just pulled, was it Astra or something? Yeah, they just pulled their vaccinations for blood clotting issues. And now Pfizer and the other company is also now looking at retraction at some level. And so, what people don't realize, even what's going on, like I said, history is going to repeat itself. Everything is cyclical. So while people are wanting to make that choice to receive their vaccine or making that choice to not receive it, it's not that it's right or wrong. It's just that we should have that freedom of choice to choose, anything that's, we're getting nervous about, well, you can't fly in a plane and you can't do this and you can't do that, right? And we know that constitutionally that's not right. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know all the constitutional stuff, but but we know constitutionally that is not right, because anything that's done against my will, if I look at rape and that I have been raped, then against my will, that is then going to be held up in a court of law. If something is being done against my will, then that is against my bodily and constitutional rights. So I think I just went off on a little tangent there, but we know that science is always evolving and failing, and we have to let it evolve and we have to let it fail. because this is when we can then come with our true and measurable outcomes to science. So it's not, like I said, we talked about, it's not to be demonized out there. Let's just have a safe space that it's going to be respected and acknowledged. Let's just present the facts and the information. Let's not, put down the other side for thinking differently. And when I was a grad student and I went and listened to a lecture by the doctor, and he was also a lawyer, and he just said at the end, just make sure you peel back the onion layers and follow the money trail. That is all. That is all. And as soon as you can just I've always say that, peel back the onion layers and follow the money trail. I tend to put that sometimes at the end of some of my posts, just to get people to think that, well, Bill Gates donates 20% of the funding to the WHO from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Follow money trail.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to look at where this is happening, because as I forget someone stated, is that, as Michelle, you stated that, if someone is sponsoring something or is trying to sell something, then I'm going to take that with a grain of salt. So yeah, that's just a little more information in terms of how we think and how we determine conspiracy theories versus, versus what is reality, because the reality is that people do get injured from medicine. People do get injured from science. People do get injured from vaccines. That is not to be discredited. And there's a whole separate court system designed for vaccine injuries that's separate from the court system, where if I get injured from Vioxx, or if Vioxx made me sick, I can sue that company directly. Where if I get injured from the Pfizer vaccine, I have to report it through a separate courting system. So to recognize that that does exist, that there is a separate system exists, just makes people to question. But as was stated before, is that people go, well, they become fearful because they want to separate that fearful emotion from what they feel like they've been told, and that is factual. And that's hard to separate those two feelings, from take that emotion out of it and look at what is the possibility, what is going to be the outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to do one more go around, because we could probably talk almost all day about this, and there's tons of questions I didn't even get to, and this is just such a good discussion, and I'm so grateful to all of you for sharing your perspectives and voices. But maybe we can go around one more time, starting with Emily, and just talk about any golden nuggets that you've learned along your journey, researching science and health and trying to do, the best thing for your, families, or any other tips that you have for the listeners.
I think really just asking questions is just what we all need to do. And as parents, especially, we do that all the time, right? I mean, if you're deciding on your baby shampoo, then we're comparing, and we're reading ingredients, and we're doing that kind of thing. And it can become really overwhelming when we try to take on so much of it, and we feel like we have to be perfect all the time. And instead, just allowing it to be a journey rather than having to figure it all out right now, and to also align with people. And that's one of the reasons I love following Tricia so much, because she, has such a great passion for this and shares such great information that's a little bit different than what I'm typically researching, but it's all important. So in finding those trusted resources that do help you to think and do encourage you to, get a little bit out of your comfortable box, that's a really good and healthy thing for all of us to do. And as we continue asking questions, is to listen to people that offer good information, that have nothing really to gain from it, as was discussed, and to really just allow ourselves to take that emotion out. We're women, we're so emotional anyway, right? Like, take the emotions out and just consider the facts, the questions, make a little chart if you need to, do a little SWOT analysis per se, and just allow ourselves to not have it all figured out, because that's what we so want. Is we're especially as Americans, we want these quick, easy solutions. We want to just, for that to be we want that settled feeling. Like, we've talked about that in several different ways today. And that's just not really the most healthy place for us to be. Now, we don't need to be stressed out and, overwhelmed by all of it, which is, it's easy to become that way. And I think that's why a lot, the general population is seeking for firm answers so much, because so much of this and so many of the varying opinions and the changing minds and speaking it as truth, but then the truth changes, just for the leading experts in charge of supposedly that we're supposed to listen to, there's so much confusion. And so we want so much to grasp that thing that's going to eliminate the confusion. And then we just want to push everything else aside. But in our search for truth, we've really got to stay in that uncomfy place a little bit, and to constantly be asking, am I wrong? Could I be wrong? Could this be wrong? Could this position be wrong? And how can I draw from these different sources to help me find a place where I feel like I'm continuing to seek, but I'm okay where I am? And it is so psychological and so emotional for so many people. And if we can take that out a little bit, I think we get ourselves in a healthier place.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points. Thank you. Megan, how about you?
I think I would suggest two things. So if you're a parent and you're doing research, one of the frustrations that I've had is that I'll often find a paper that I want to read, but it is not available. Just the summary is available to read, and not the whole thing to get into the details and really understand how the data was analyzed or considered. And one thing that I've learned through the years is that you can contact the researchers that were part of the study, and they will be glad to send you a copy of their study for free. So you don't have to join for $300 a year for the annual membership to have access to that journal. And also you can often email them questions, and they are happy to answer your questions. And you can write, if you're a parent and not a scientist, and even if you are a scientist, sometimes you don't have all of the awareness of the terminology that a different branch of science might be utilizing. But they are almost always happy to respond and answer your questions. Remember, they're sitting in a lab somewhere just hoping someone's going to pay attention to them, right? And everybody ignores them except for these small bursts where they get things published in a peer-reviewed journal. So they do love to be asked about their work, just like we all do. Then the other thing I would suggest, so that's kind of like on the research side, and the other part I would suggest is the only way we're going to move the ball forward, if that's the goal, is by developing empathy. And not just empathy for our own message, but empathy for those who are resisting considering alternative views. And I might suggest doing that by coming up with or writing down 3 reasons that the individual might have accurate information, right? So kind of put yourself in their shoes and look at the data from their point of view, and say, okay, this could be accurate because of this, that, or I come up with 3 seems to be good. It's hard to do sometimes when you really disagree with the data that they're presenting. And if you can't do that, then come up with 3 reasons why they might be so resistant to considering your new information. And that develops empathy, and then you're able to go into conversations as a conversation and not as an attack. And I think that blossoms from there.
Yeah, that's awesome tips. Thank you so much for that. Michele, how about you?
Just a couple of points. One is that your number one responsibility is yourself and your well-being and your family. I say that because I see a lot of people that are very kind people being bullied and manipulated into doing things for other people. Like, oh, we have to all do this because that's like herd stuff. And, last I heard now 80% have to get vaccinated for that to be like herd immunity. I mean, talk about absurd, like that's not a number, that's not science, and they keep moving it. So just to say, and for me, with my, various whatever psychological and ministry background, like sometimes I can't see clearly about what I might throw myself under the bus. But then I think about like, oh, what if my daughter was in this situation? And I'd be like, oh, hell no. It's like, oh, okay, well, just to notice. So sometimes that empathy for what I would do for my daughter, how I'd advise my daughter, helps me stand up for myself and for my family, because that is our number one responsibility. we're not, I don't think called to sacrifice our well-being and our children's well-being for the purpose of some scientific study. Like, if you want to do that, go right ahead, but that is not a moral obligation to do that. I think another really good principle is that there must be a pretty high level of compelling evidence that there is a gain in making a change. So in other words, that's why they keep on saying this is an emergency. We have to be in an emergency right now, because that's why we're allowed to do this stuff. If we're not in an emergency, then there's not that compelling reason why we need to, negate all of these basic principles that we've had operating in civilization for hundreds of years. So, and that goes for any decision I've made in my life. If I want to move into a different house, like, I really got to think about that. What's the gain? And there has to be a compelling reason to take a risk. We can't be risk adverse, because there's a lot we miss out on life, but there's got to be a compelling gain relative to the possible loss. And also that there's short-term and long-term gain, and short-term and long-term risk. And these, this current situation, there's absolutely no one can possibly say they have a clue about long-term. And a lot of stuff, when you look into the vaccine science, a lot of the stuff you don't know. For 10, 20 years, you also, some of the vaccine stuff showed that, and this is not corona, this is just in general, like, the infertility issues don't happen in the rat that got the vaccine. It happens in their children. Their children can't have. So just to kind of like look at when you're making decisions, it's short term, but it's also long term. So how big is that urgency for you to be taking these risks? Thirdly, stand your ground. We have freedoms. And people dupe us into thinking that we don't. So we give up that ground, and that ground is very hard to get back once you've ceded it. And along those lines, courage is contagious. When we stand up for, and can find that, whether it's on our faith or in what we're committed to, or in some experience that our child had, or something that makes us really, urgent and brave about something, do that. Be brave, because it inspires other people to be brave too. And just courage is contagious.
Yeah, sure is. I gain a lot of courage from my conversations with each of you and watching what you are posting and sharing, whether it's on Facebook or in a group or whatnot. So thank you for that. Jasmine, how about you?
Yeah, I think when it comes to science and research, that we have every right as an American to question its face value. And when I was in grad school, I was told that 1 in 7 published research was skewed. And we know that that number has probably gone up. And I just really quickly found something that was published probably 10 years ago, that the New England Journal of Medicine, over a year-long period ending in that 10 years ago, they published 73 articles on original studies of new drugs encompassing drugs approved by the FDA since 2000 and experimental drugs. Of those articles, 60 were funded by pharmaceutical companies, 50 were co-written by drug company employees, and 37 had a lead author, typically an academic who had previously accepted outside compensation from the sponsoring drug company in the form of a consultant pay, grants, or speaker fees. Okay, so of course, these billions of dollars that big pharma invests in research and development that lead to life-changing innovations and treatments, we can't ignore this. So this is why we always have to, follow that money trail. And, so is quote that was put on by Upton Sinclair had once said, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it." Okay.
Yes.
Right. So it is hard to decipher research when you've got to look at the what went on under the table and into the pockets. And so that cannot be ignored. And we really need to, it's worth examining the sources of funding for each study that is published, and keep this in mind when we're evaluating the research out there. It is not perfect. It is always evolving, and it is always failing. And I think the one thing as a mom who's trying to teach at least my daughter right now is, how to carry on the wisdom and respecting her intuition and letting her, not only her intellectual mind, but her intuition guide her. Because that is being lost today in medicine. It is lost. The doctors, well, I carried my child, I should know my child. I live with my child, I should know my child. Where doctors get a snapshot, but teaching our children this infinite wisdom that can be carried on for generations. And that is really important. So those are my 2 points.
Yeah, that's critically important. And like I said in the beginning, how we're zooming out and taking a broader perspective. Like, isn't that so powerful to teach our kids, like, hey, you know something, even if you're a kid, like you have a gut feeling or you have an instinct, or you kind of have a sense of what's right for you. Like that means something. Like it's not like you go with it because your brain's not fully developed yet, but that's part of the equation. That's one of your tools in your toolkit. And you don't have to just blindly listen to what a grown-up says just because they're older than you. Like it's your body and it's your life, and you have something to say about it. Like that's a pretty huge idea for our kids. Yeah. Well, I wish we could keep going. This has just been such a great discussion. And again, thank you all for being here. And I hope everyone listening has just maybe gotten some new perspective. Maybe you've broadened your perspective. We hope you feel inspired. Just think for yourself. You're absolutely capable of it. It's absolutely worth your time and effort. We all need to think really critically. This is a time in our history that's quite unique, and things are changing very rapidly. And get into the conversation, be brave and courageous, like we all said, and go ahead and talk with your family and friends and speak your truth. We keep hearing speak your truth. It doesn't have to be anybody else's, but if you can be brave to get into the conversations, you all might learn something. You might learn something new. They might learn something new. That's the way we're going to, like Meghan said, move the ball forward in some way, because we can't just keep fighting with each other. We've got to move this ball forward somehow. And this is our huge opportunity to do it. So thank you, each of you, for being part of the conversation. I encourage you guys and everyone else to keep participating. Thanks so much.
Thank you.